Well, welcome. Thank you all for being here. It's a pleasure to be together and be talking about a really important issue in this time and place. Christina, I want to start with you. One of the critical challenges and issues in responding to a humanitarian emergency is the need to move money quickly and immediately, often before we see the pledges come in, which sometimes take years. We know that. Sometimes they're not even fully pledged. And UNICEF USA has designed funds to help try to address that challenge. Can you tell me a little bit about the instruments that you're developing and you've been using and sort of what you're exploring to try to drive more finance into the space to ensure that money is where it needs to be immediately so that you can address challenges more quickly and more effectively?
Sure. Well, thank you again for having me today, and a pleasure to, I can't actually see all of you, but be here with all of you today. And you said it, I mean, time matters. Time equals lives saved. It equals savings in dollars and increased impact. And the key tool that we have designed and that has been around for the last 10 years to help UNICEF with those cash gaps is the Bridge Fund. And it fast tracks money to humanitarian contexts ahead of donor pledges and money coming in. And we know donors are incredibly generous, but it takes a beat or two for that money to arrive. And so we have, over the last 10 years, accelerated over $500 million to UNICEF in humanitarian settings to buy supplies and pre-position health supplies and ensure programs continue uninterrupted. And we've been able to do that by creating a revolving debt fund. And we've also managed to pay back every one of our dollars borrowed, so no defaults. And the context is really important. UNICEF, for those of you who don't know, has for 75 years relentlessly pursued the rights of every child in over 190 countries. And in refugee settings, I mean, those are some of the most complex situations for children. They're not in their homes. Most often, they're not in school. They don't have access to healthcare or immunization. And so ensuring that UNICEF has the dollars to provide those services as quickly as possible results in actual lives saved, right? So if you're able to get water, health supplies to those communities more quickly, they can recover more quickly. The savings piece is also important. By getting money to buy supplies and ship them ahead of time, often you're doing it at a lower cost basis, and those savings can be repositioned back to serve those communities. And maybe just one quick example is Ukraine. So very quickly, after the war started, in communication with our UNICEF colleagues, we knew that there was an effort to get money to set up the Blue Dot Centers in partnership with UNHCR. And so within a week and a half, we were able to accelerate millions of dollars. We've now accelerated over 20 million to help fund the Blue Dot Centers. There's 32 of them. And those are providing respite, information, guidance, child protection services to children and reunification services. So that's an example, and I could talk further about what we did in COVID. And there's another example, but let me pause there and give my colleagues
We'll come back to that and get into some of the details, too, of sort of how you're mobilizing that financing and where it's coming from. Tim, you and I have known each other for quite a while. And we heard a little bit about the immediate response. What you're focused on is the long term.
That's right.
It's sort of this link between humanitarian finance and development. And we know that people who are displaced today are often displaced for many, many years. And so a big part of what you're figuring out is how do you support them in those places and support livelihoods, not just for them, but for the surrounding communities. So tell us a little bit about these sort of durable financing solutions that you're working on, the market that you're trying to build around refugee and displaced person funding.
Yeah, thanks, Adva. And thanks to everyone. The Refugee Investment Network was really established to be an investment intermediary. We're trying to create an impact investment field that's akin to gender lens investing, green investing, for example, investing in climate. The investment community is there. They're interested capital partners understand the why, but they don't know how. And so we've really stood up to answer that question. How do you source an investment? How do you measure impact? How do you mobilize capital? in a way that has impact on a specified group. And as you pointed out in your intro, never has the problem been as serious as it is right now. Over 100 million people are forcibly displaced. With regards to the protracted displacement of people, the factoid there is that if you've been displaced for 5 years or longer, the average time you're displaced is 17 years. So people aren't going home either. And so that's what we're talking about here, these sorts of durable solutions that help people integrate into their society, both economically and socially, really needs some sort of facilitating mechanism. And so the RIN really works between the two sides. We're very much demand-driven. We have refugee investments. We have a lens that we promote, the refugee investing lens, similar again to the gender investing lens. So you can qualify everyone from a refugee entrepreneur to a multinational corporation that's intentionally engaging refugee populations and host communities. We're very strong on the support of host communities as well. And with the other side, the interested capital community, we're trying to create these mechanisms, funds, de-risking mechanisms, educating communities as well of investors so that they can mobilize capital in this sort of way.
Because these communities would be considered very high risk, right? I mean, it's people who, we know they might end up where they are for a while, but we don't know if they'll necessarily stay there.
Yeah.
They are often maybe outsiders in that community. Mm-hmm. They have gone through trauma often to get to where they are. So how do you look at, how do you convince investors who could probably find something else to invest in, maybe even cryptocurrencies, though maybe that right now, not such a safe bet, but how do you convince them that what they should be investing in, or what they can be investing in, or de-risking it to an extent that they're interested in investing in these?
You have to show opportunity. And our flagship report is called Paradigm Shift, and it's just filled with data that challenge some of these assumptions that forcibly displaced people are always on the move, they're not a safe credit risk, that they perhaps don't work as hard. It's absolutely the opposite of that. Displaced people are often extremely gritty, extremely loyal. They repay debt at the same rate or greater than their host community members. So we do this through data, through a set of facts, to show that there are safe bets in the entrepreneurial side, and with the impact, the human relation, the HR side of businesses as well, the impact is tremendous to bring these into the workforce. I mean, I think we try to work with data. You can't tell capital what to do, right? I mean, you have to show them where the opportunity lies and then let them make their own decision.
Dante, I want to turn to you. The last time we had Devex World in person was 4 years ago, and I don't think we would have been talking about cryptocurrency in a conversation about humanitarian finance. But here we are, because the world is changing. And I think people are often intimidated by digital currencies and what they mean and how they can be used. And so I'm hoping that you can tell us a little bit about what you see as the potential for digital currencies in the humanitarian finance space and what's worked so far. I know that you have a few examples of where, different ways that digital finance could be used.
That's a lighthearted question. Easy one to answer, though. Think about what you and I could not do pre-pandemic that we could only do in the pandemic where technology was the difference maker. Educational continuity hinged on technology to the extent you won the postal code lottery and you had access to the internet and you had access to Zoom and you had access to Google Meet. Your classroom, notwithstanding the burden you put on your teacher, continued. Think about all of the other things around the world that ground to a halt. Politics, government, business, household, payments, banking continuity, all ground to a halt. And so in the course of 1 year of COVID-19, we accelerated a decade of digital transformation. It still was heavily skewed. And then I asked myself, and I think this audience, will appreciate the reference to the first of the Sustainable Development Goals, which is to eradicate extreme poverty. If to do so hinges on brick and mortar, if that's the only pathway of banking unbanked populations is brick and mortar, then the way we have done it before has reached a point of diminishing returns. And so the idea then that underpins public blockchain infrastructure, most of which is open source, and that underpins responsible digital currency innovation, is then a big idea, which is that every internet-connected device on the planet can become a part of a compliant payment endpoint. Device-centric banking, software intermediated capital markets. So the crypto in crypto comes from cryptography, which is the presumption that you could have activity on the internet that protects your privacy and that provides you assurances that it can be technologically trusted. Like any new evolution or revolution technologically, there's always bad actors. I work for a good actor. That good actor has a $55 billion digital currency that has processed $5.5 trillion of payments in a world where the transmission of value is flat, instant, and you could exchange with trusted counterparties. Profound implications for the movement of money in the humanitarian context, profound implications for the movement of money when people need it most. Speed matters and friction stands in the way. Soft pledges stand in the way. Government development aid stands in the way. And the fact that we've all hit this point of diminishing returns in the global economy stands in the way. There's only one bright spot in an otherwise pretty doom and gloom world, and that is whole of society breakthrough innovation, where technology itself is not a panacea, but it shows us where status quo and where incumbents have fallen short. And that's what we're doing with banking and payments.
So tell us a little bit, like, do you have an example? Help us understand, how could we use digital currency to respond to a humanitarian crisis, to Ukraine, for example?
Well, let me give you an example that's anchored in what is the alternative. Because oftentimes the crypto conversation tends to skew to headlines. Bitcoin value movements have nothing to do with the world that I care about. But what was the alternative to Afghanistan? If you were moving official development aid, you moved a pallet of cash, you flew it to the Bagram Air Base, and you effectively dropped a honeypot for corruption, bribery, and fraud that was untraceable and that could only be extended as far as your arm could reach, right? The alternative then is what we've done in Venezuela, the Circle. In Venezuela, we set up a network of instant cross-border corruption-resistant payments denominated in USDC that would reach the exact beneficiary.
For people who don't know, what is USDC?
Yeah, so USDC is Circle's digital currency. Today, it's the 4th largest digital currency in circulation, on a pathway to becoming the 3rd. And it's dollar denominated, which means it's treasuries and dollars in the American regulated banking system. It also means it's conforming to OFAC sanctions and FinCEN and financial privacy and all the other expectations
And
that
less
you would
volatile than some of the other cryptocurrencies?
Much less volatile, because the presumption is crypto's original sin was buyer's and spender's remorse. But the innovation is genuinely a breakthrough in the transmission of value in a hot, flat, and crowded world. This is a very powerful innovation for the speed and movement of money in a device-centric manner. It's available in 191 countries. It's a 4-year-old innovation available on an open digital wallet environment in 191 countries. So the job to be done, why I'm on the Devex stage and why I've partnered with Devex, is to say that our job then is to connect the dots. It's to accelerate a new digital humanitarian blueprint in which there's no longer an excuse for the United Nations to labor under, how do I get money to Ukrainian refugees? How do I get money to Afghanistan? How do I get money to Haiti? How do I get money to Puerto Rico? We had the 2nd longest blackout in history after Typhoon Haiyan in the Philippines. And the United States, a fortress nation, couldn't move money to Puerto Rico fast enough to help people on the island. And so in a world where we have so few alternatives, and so many of the alternatives that we rely on are antiquated and are promoting financial exclusion, I think this is a very, very powerful revolution to connect all these dots.
I'm curious, Christina, what you think about that. Do you see an organization like UNICEF, and I actually know that UNICEF is exploring some of this, but do you think UN organizations are going to start looking to, maybe more stable cryptocurrencies and digital currencies to help provide funding?
Look, I think there's already the crypto fund within UNICEF that raises crypto donations through organizations like UNICEF USA, and then invests in crypto, so it doesn't convert it to fiat, in digital public good companies. So that is already happening. There are a lot of conversations around how to leverage technologies like Circle to accelerate the work that UNICEF is doing. Again, we still need the financing piece. We need to make sure the dollars that are going to come later can be given now. But then it's amazing if they can then be sent like this, right? You don't have to process a grant and then send a wire and then have it received and then have it confirmed. So I do think unquestionably UNICEF and other organizations are looking at that, but we have to make sure that we have, again, that it's safe, reliable, acceptable, that we can get those means there. And so we are using digital cash transfers in Afghanistan, in Ukraine, and I think we're exploring things like what Dante is saying as well.
Right. One question I wanted to put to you all, and we are running short on time because this is a big topic to cover in 20 minutes and virtually impossible. I think one of the challenges in this space with different forms of finance is that they're not often designed with an end user of a person who's displaced or a refugee or someone who's just suffered in the wake of a natural disaster. So the question I want to ask each of you is, how can the financing tools that we see today be sort of designed better or take into account the true needs of the populations that we're talking about when we're talking about humanitarian finance?
So a couple of thoughts. I think one is when the situation on the ground changes, the financial tools have to change with the situation. And my colleague Francesco in his flash talk was talking about how, and you said it, Tim, some of the populations that UNICEF is serving are not temporarily displaced. They're more permanently displaced, on average 9 years or more. Trucking and water, which might have been a solution on a temporary basis, is no longer a viable solution. So we need to really think about investing in building a water infrastructure that supports the community in that displaced community.
There's actually a really interesting example of that. ICRC in Goma is doing just that. And it's something that, they've sort of pushed and stretched themselves because it's not something that they've typically done, to support that infrastructure. But if you're responding to a humanitarian crisis for a decade,
you have to change your ways. And investors and the financial community needs to evolve with us, right? So they have to think about, can I make a longer term commitment while the savings accrue so that we can do this with capital, not philanthropy? Can I be flexible to ensure that organizations like UNICEF have the means to decide where the funds can go rather than us dictating a particular geography or thematic? And also providing flexible funding options. For us, we're very sensitive to pricing, right? So being able to have lines of credit where we can draw money and repay it back as the money is needed and not is really important. So that's just 3 ideas.
Great. Tim, I'm curious what you think or maybe what you're hearing from people who have capital about what they need to jump into this space better.
That's right, Ava. We are very much investor facing, and so we very much feel like, again, we're demand driven. So the tools that we develop, the research we produce, the data we share, we feel like is really helping the field mature. Again, I want to come back to this field building idea to show people that there are investments out there where you can have impact, you can make return. Some of our partners are impact first, right? They're looking for their impact first, not so concerned with returns. Some are returns first. They have to be. The lens that we promote, which has been very much crowdsourced, is a very broad aperture. We learned from many of the people that worked in the gender investing space who said they sort of at the outset defined themselves out of investors. They made it too hard for capital to move into an area. We've kept it broad but impactful, and we'll measure impact there. And so we feel like that's a very much in-demand tool, framework for people to operate with.
So really creating a sort of thing that they understand already because they've used it to implement different types of financing and sort of learning to speak their language, and then traditional, providing the proof, having the track record.
And that's probably the most important thing that people may be wondering, are we seeing any evidence of this catching on? And we are. We're seeing a number of funds stand up. We're seeing the humanitarian community more broadly move into the fund space, the impact space. There's a lot of examples of that, and we're really excited by that. The field is moving.
Great. Well, that's pretty optimistic, which is great. I like optimism. It's kind of hard to find sometimes in this space. We are basically out of time, but Dante, I wanted to give you a chance for just a last word, if you wanted, about perhaps this design issue, because I know that's one of the things you're thinking about. How do you make digital currency accessible to people who maybe don't have a lot of digital or financial literacy?
Yeah, I mean, I suppose I do have to end on an optimistic note, which is that if we collectively bend the arc of Moore's law in humanity's favor, then what do we get on the other side of it? We get a form of value that can convey with little more than a low-cost internet-connected device, and a form of value that can be in place before a disaster strikes or before any of the types of crises that we've been labored under as a planet. You can't buy insurance when your house is on fire, and a lot of the tools are already in the hands of billions of people around the world. What we need to do is just figure out how to connect the dots with purpose.
Great. Well, thank you all so much, and thank you.